If you don't own something, you're not the boss. You have to take full responsibility for everything that you do. Why be subservient? You must be the master of your own kingdom. You've got to own you can't just walk into things with your eyes half open. You've got to walk into things with your eyes fully open. You've got to know what you're getting into. You have to take possession of your life. There needs to be some period in your day where you remember that there's a world out there trying to tell you who you are, and there's a world in here that's trying to tell you who you are. Now, where do you want to put your eggs? Because the world outside is very noisy and very tempting, and it has all the razzmatazz, it has all the tinsel and all the glitter. It's got all the toys. But that's because you don't think you're enough in the first place. If you don't think you're enough in the first place, the whole idea of the world to sell you stuff is, first of all, they have to make you feel bad about yourself, less than in some way. So the world will try and tell you who you are, and you have to tell yourself who you are. And there's this ongoing battle. And somehow there needs to be a reconciliation between the two. But in the end, you've got to have all the eggs in your basket. The external world is, I'm asking you to tell me who I am. That's what we're all playing at. And as soon as you start playing that game, we run into all sorts of trouble. Call it the ego, call it whatever you want to call it. But that's the dynamic that we're in. And somehow we have to give ourselves enough confidence to reassure ourselves that we are enough. However, I enter the game because I've got to move on in the world, I've got to crack on in the world, and I know there's loads of temptations that can come along the way. So I will own the suit. I'm going to wear the suit, but I'm going to own the suit. Now, I don't mean by paying for it, I mean by owning it. It's now my suit, it's my idea to put on this suit. I have to personalize it in some way. I have to understand a narrative that allows me to own that suit. And thereby, I put on my suit of armor and I come out into the world. And guess what? I'm having a good time because I'm owning the suit. I'll give you an example. The prodigal son. Parable, Christian, seems religious, doesn't really make much sense. So there's a father. He has two sons, an older son and a younger son. And he says to them, who wants to spend their inheritance? The younger son says, me, Dad, I'll go and spend it. And the younger son takes all the dough and he runs off and sniffs coke off strippers' tits for a number of years until he realises this is getting pretty boring and I'm in a lot of trouble. He ends up throwing food to pigs. That's his job. And he can't even eat the food that he gives to the pigs, at which point he says, Dad, will you take me back? Dad then goes to, they don't meet. This somehow happens, not through telephones, it just happens. At which point, Dad goes to the fatted calf, says, kill the fatted calf. Older son says, hold on, Dad, what's going on? I've stayed with you since the beginning. I've been loyal to you. And I hear the stories of my younger brother coming back, who's been sniffing coke off strippers' tits for the last, God knows how many years. And you're prepared to kill the fatted calf. What's the SP, Dad? I want to know the story. He says, you're all right, son. Don't worry about that. You take a little step to the side. You'll always be with me. You're a good boy. At which point he goes out to meet the prodigal son, the wasteful son. The wasteful son returns and he says, you were lost and now you're found. That's the end of the story. It's quite hard to make sense of that in a literal sense. You go, oh, Dad was a bit unfair and you should have been kind to the older son because he never ran off and did anything. But the essence of the story is that you are the father. You are enough. Your older son is your intellect. He says, oh, don't do this, don't do that. He's trying to reconcile, make sense of a prosaic and material world. The younger son, being the wild, feral entity that he is, wants to go out in the world and find out what it's all about. So in his recklessness and sense of adventure, he finds that he can't escape himself. So he has to return to himself. And at which point, he has to accept who he is. At which point the intellect is left out of the equation pretty much as the older brother, because he can't understand the significance of the journey of the wasteful brother. In the end, you have to leave yourself to understand the value of yourself. You have to lose stuff before you realize that all the stuff that you're losing is ephemeral and transitory. It's not yours. You're enough. You're always enough. But you've got to somehow prostitute yourself before you realise your own value. That is the essence of all stories. King Arthur, the story you just made. A man is a king, has a son. The son, the father runs into a bit of aggro. The son jumps into a little boat, a little skillet, and he's not skillet. That's what you cook your chops on, isn't it?
Yeah.
Skiff, a little skiff. The skiff takes off down the river. He gets found by prostitutes. He's brought up in a brothel. He understands the ways of the street. He becomes a king on the street. He works his way out the different ladders, and then he pulls a sword from a stone at a certain point in his life, a certain point of evolution, and then from there he goes on to be the king. There's a bit of a tussle all along the way, lots of wrestling matches. In the end, he fights down his demons and he becomes the king. So what's the significance of this narrative? That every man in himself is aristocratic, that he is his own king. He takes a sojourn into the material world, has to climb up all the different rungs on the ladder, and ultimately has to return to himself. The significance of the extraction from the sword from the stone is the stone is the material world. The material world, which seems all solid because it controls you whilst you're projecting your sense of identity upon it. The extraction of the stone is taking back your own authority, your own divinity, your own authority, your own identity, whatever it is that you've got to call it, your own power. You're no longer looking for a sense of self outside of yourself. And then you have to face the demons that you've created in your history by facing them and fighting them and owning them. You put them in the face of who you are, and that's a wrestling match. You'd have to take away all these crutches, and that's all that we struggle from in life, is taking away our crutches. Oh, please tell me who I am. Oh, please give me a bit more money so other people think I'm clever. Oh, and then I'll have a nice cut and people think I'm clever. You've got to take away all these crutches and stand as the man that you are, and you're liberated from your whole thing. So that is the story of King Arthur. But it's not just the story of King Arthur, it's the story of all narrative. And in our literal mind, we look at a narrative and we see the narrative for what we believe it to be, the exterior aspect of the narrative. So we see the world upside down. We're not actually interested in the essence of the narrative because we're so busy pandering after the approval of others. So everything that we see, every narrative that we listen to, every film that you see, you're not really interested in its soul. You're interested in its body, because that's what we correspond to.